Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on powerful instructional coaching practices. My name is Roger Fiedler, Director of Communications at McREL, and I'm glad that you could join us today. Assisting us is my colleague Madonna Schaefer, who is behind the scenes running the technology for today's session. And in a moment, I'll turn things over to our presenter, Dr. Stone. But first, just a couple of preliminary notes. Our webinar is scheduled for approximately 45 minutes, depending a little bit on the number of questions that we receive as we go along. And in order to keep our audio as clear as possible, we've muted all of our audience members' microphones. So if you do have questions or comments for our presenter during the webinar, please type them into the chat area that's located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I'll keep track of questions as we go along, and we'll save some time at the end of the session for Dr. Stone to address your questions. You can also use the chat area to converse with fellow participants, reflecting on the things that you're learning during today's session. If you run into any technical issues with your audio or video, please use the chat box for those as well, and Madonna will assist you. We are recording today's session, and in the next day or two, I'll send you all a link to the recording, and I'll also include a copy of the slide deck for you. For those of you who aren't familiar with McREL, we are a nonprofit research and development organization that studies best practices in teaching, leading, and school system improvement. We then use those findings to provide training, coaching, and consulting to schools and districts across the country and around the world to help staff and students flourish. Our presenter today is Dr. B.J. Stone, a consulting director here at McREL. Dr. Stone is a former middle and high school science teacher, a university instructor, and a central office administrator. At McREL, she helps K through 12 teachers, instructional coaches, and district leaders with adoption of high-quality, research-based strategies for instruction, curriculum, and assessment. She is a co-author of the second editions of McREL's popular Classroom Instruction That Works book and its companion handbook. And with that, Dr. Stone, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roger. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining learners from across the nation for today's webinar. It is my hope that you will not think of this learning opportunity as an event, but instead as part of a journey. Since no one's a completed project, this is a chance for all of us to come together as learners, thinkers, and doers with a goal of adding to and deepening our understanding about inside-out instructional coaching. The research from the second edition of Classroom Instruction That Works informs us that learners of all ages need learning objectives to set the stage for learning. In keeping with that, it is my intent that by the end of this learning session, we will know a conversational definition for inside-out instructional coaching, that will understand how approaching instructional coaching from the inside out expands the learning environment and equips teachers to engage in focused discussions about teaching and learning, and ultimately to be able to think about ways to apply the learning within our schools and districts. And it's that third one that I hope you focus on a lot, this whole transferability from what we're talking about and learning today back into classroom practice. The research from the second edition of Classroom Instruction That Works also tells us that providing an opportunity for learners to personalize the objectives activates their prior knowledge and invites them to engage in the lesson. So as you think about what we will know, understand, and be able to do by the end of this session, I want you to take a moment and reflect individually or speak with the people who are around you. I'm hoping that perhaps you're not learning alone today, but if you are, you can reflect. Otherwise, please talk. But look at this question. What attitudes and beliefs do you believe maximize instructional coaching? I'll give you a couple minutes to think and to process and to chat. So let me tell you what I've heard as I've asked that question of others. I'll give you three good examples that sort of capture some of the essence of what I've heard. One of them is that their answer to what attitudes and beliefs do you believe maximize instructional coaching, people have said that you need to hold a belief that all students and teachers can learn, that that's truly a way to maximize instructional coaching. Others have said that in order to maximize instructional coaching, you have to maintain a growth mindset. And a third example is that believing that most of the answers are in the room and that teachers can and should help each other grow really helps us maximize the instructional coaching that occurs. You may have noticed as you work with staff members that some people will tell you that they already know this information. But as you and I well understand, we come to know something through learning about a topic and by watching others model the process or the information. But knowing is not doing. Our task as instructional leaders is to assist others in converting what is known into action. Otherwise, the knowing is much like having a hard-boiled egg. We don't know there's a golden center until we crack it open and do something with it. Moving knowing into doing is so much easier to talk about than it is to put into action. It's critical to note that according to Joyce and Showers, doing requires practice, time to rehearse our learning, accompanied by coaching. Our focus for this session is to position instructional coaching as the bridge to assisting others as they transform what is known into actions so they can implement with consistency and with fidelity. The old paradigm of focusing and forcing people to change or implement an initiative is a very top-down model. Rewards and punishments only prove effective when there is someone around to continue to distribute the proverbial carrots and to administer some sort of punishment. This model is not sustainable, and it often fails to bring about really the desired results. I want to share a different model with you. And I want you to consider this model as we look at change from the inside out. Inside-out thinking and behaving begins with creating a shared purpose. This is very different than someone dictating or directing the purpose. And we know that in the crush of daily events, it's easy to lose sight of purpose, yet believing in something as being important has spillover in affecting the beliefs about change and growth, that things really are possible. Next, people are encouraged to unleash their curiosity. Placing curiosity, engagement, and motivation at the center of schooling is really important. And it brings about those kind of I wonder questions. Building on bright spots negates deficit thinking, promotes positivity, and enhances the mindset of possibility. People begin to say to one another, gosh, if we were succeeding at doing this, why not believe that we can move forward doing even better? It's just a sense of positivity bubbling up. One of the important aspects of organizational change from the inside out is based on asking more questions, providing fewer answers, and resisting the urge to tell, which is hard for some of us, isn't it? The groundswell of ideas from staff working collaboratively as they reframe challenges and surface new solutions becomes paramount. To create a kind of learning environment that allows curiosity to flourish, schools might consider borrowing from organizations where the secret to success is learning by doing, continually testing and improving products in rapid cycles. So schools can do the same by allowing teachers to co-develop new approaches to learning and then testing and improving them based on the data they're collecting. If you look at number 6 then, this becomes one of the real big features of what you and I are going to talk about today, this idea of supporting change through peer coaching. It's not to say that numbers 1 through 5 are not important, but listen to the features around supporting peer coaching. Inside Out nudges us to rediscover peer coaching. Although we've long known that the key to professional learning lies in combining theory, demonstration, practice, feedback, and peer coaching together, we often overlook the power of this. Worse, we may turn peer coaching into a top-down monitoring or compliance kind of situation. The real power lies in peers offering this critical friend feedback and help to one another as they move forward to mastery. And we're going to think a lot about that today. But I don't want to overlook this last piece about reframing a goal. What we measure is really what we get. So if we measure student performance on standardized tests, we sometimes feel like we're getting uninspired teaching and learning. We certainly don't need to get rid of large-scale testing, but rather I would offer to us that we consider a rebalance of testing, looking at performance assessments which can give us some large-scale accountability but still keep us within the frame of looking at things through a little bit different lens. I know you can read, but I want to read you this description of instructional coaching from the inside out, because it takes us back to our first objective, which was to know a conversational definition for inside-out coaching. And as I read to you, I want you to reflect on the pieces that you saw in the inside-out model. An inside-out approach to instructional coaching is grounded in the belief that teacher-led teams are best prepared to respond to the instructional needs of students, and that using this approach better supports and motivates teachers in strengthening their instructional practice. Teachers work collaboratively to identify and address problems of practice. This method leverages existing bright spots, using them as stepping stones for all teachers, new and experienced, to reach higher levels of performance. And I want to take you back for just a moment to look at this critical word, all. Because in many coaching models, the teachers who receive support are new teachers, those induction level teachers, and struggling teachers. And I want us to think about induction taking care of new teachers and other programs taking care of struggling teachers. But as we move to an inside-out coaching model, this is really a model that is going to bring about benefits for all of our staff. And in keeping with that, I want to give you an opportunity to look at another model. And as you think about this model, we really know that there are going to be external measures of accountability for schools and systems. So we have to ask ourselves, where is it that we can really focus and have the greatest influence? And we know that in teachers in their classroom meeting student needs. So if we leverage the power of teacher collaboration and the sharing of practices, then our support for a pathway really moves us from thinking about taking schools that may be struggling and giving them more directive assistance as they adapt and adopt better routines, but moving ultimately to over where we're really helping teachers work together to develop collegial expertise and to foster innovation. Because we know as teacher professional growth develops that there's really some remarkable things that start to happen. And I want to call these to your attention, that we really nicely move from a top-down, inside-out kind of thinking that you see here. I'll locate it for you. That you see right here, over into this inside-out kind of thinking where innovation really is at the paramount center of what's going on. A much better way for us to think about moving from external accountability to more internal accountability, where teachers are motivated to work together and to do some very, very good work. And there are several leading indicators as individuals and schools transition to an inside-out approach. And I love what's on the screen, because teachers inviting and welcoming peers into their classrooms to observe teaching and learning really is a powerful motivator for staff. We have staff who engage in peer observations and really reap the benefits of meeting together to discuss teaching and learning. Peer feedback, which plays a very large role in improving instruction, as you very well know, is requested and offered, but one of the big indicators is when we can see that there's evidence that feedback was well received and that it was put into practice, that it was used. Throughout the process of deprivatizing classrooms, teachers develop what I call the 3 C's. They develop confidence, competence, and comfort in their new roles and in the growth-oriented culture. So let's take a deeper dive into this whole idea of inside-out instructional coaching. And as we do, I want you to note how the thought of using a groundswell from the bottom up really creates a very positive result. The 3 components of inside-out instructional coaching that we're going to chat about for the rest of our time together are consider and establish coaching configurations to maximize learning, individual and collective calibration of skills and needs, and the third one, equally important to the first 2, self-reflection as an integral part of coaching. So as we take a look at this first one, as we discussed earlier, an inside-out instructional coaching model provides opportunities for all teachers to work collaboratively to identify and address problems of practice and to reach higher levels of performance. This approach positively changes the trajectory for systematic, lasting improvements in teacher practice and student learning. Team configuration can occur in several ways based on the current areas of study, individual and team needs, and the school environment. We know often in small schools that there may only be a couple teachers at one grade level, so the idea of vertical team alignment may work. Also letting teachers self-select, which may be a nice collection of teachers from multiple grade levels. When I was putting the slides together for this webinar, I considered entitling this slide, 3 is not a crowd, and I think you'll see why in just a moment. Wayne Craig and David Hopkins, who are the authors of Curiosity and Powerful Learning, focus on the power of teachers working in triads. The opportunity to engage in collegial work with 2 other peers broadens the experience for all team members, expands the professional conversations, and allows for multiple perspectives about the topics and solutions. Teachers work in assigned or self-selected groups of 3 and take turns participating in one of 3 distinct roles: coach, coachee, and observer. The role of observer adds that outside perspective that might be lost when teachers work just in pairs. Teachers engage to effectively provide descriptive feedback and ask skillful questions that encourage more reflective processing. This format requires active rather than passive involvement and gives all participants the experience in giving and receiving feedback and observing others. And there are some really nice benefits that come forward out of this. While working in triad, peer coaching teams, teachers learn from each other as they plan instruction, develop materials, observe each other working with the students, and reflect on how their own behaviors influence student learning. Secondly, the primary function of peer coaching is to learn by observing and helping colleagues by providing information about how students respond. It's not about giving expert advice. And then lastly, peer coaching triads really work together, and they commit to collecting and using data to determine how the implementation of new teaching and learning strategies are going, and to determine the impact of those on students. So the power of 3 really is an important feature for us to consider. So you've heard quite a bit of information as we've begun this webinar. I want you to take a moment to reflect on what you just heard. What did you learn? What will you do with the information? And I'm going to give you just a minute to capture your good thinking. Do some margin writes or speak to the person next to you. I'll bring you back together and let you take your good thinking from what just occurred, and let's look at the second of our 3 components, individual and collective calibration of skills and needs. So I want you to think that much like the students we have the privilege of working with, not all teachers hold the same background knowledge and skill set. So as new problems of practice are identified and new initiatives are implemented, teachers individually and collectively need to engage in calibrating their skills and their needs. Inside instructional coaching is not a model based on deficits, but rather, once again, building on the bright spots of existing knowledge and skills. It's critical to accurately calibrate the skills and needs of the teams and, on occasion, individuals on a team. Skills and needs can be assessed through surveys, questionnaires, face-to-face meetings. Needs may be as basic as just knowing the state guidelines for achievement testing, or they may be more complex and require more intensive guidance and resources. One measure of calibration, just using this as an example, might be to investigate the manner by which a team member views instruction. So I'll call your attention to the 2 squares. The yellow square calls us to look at, is the ownership of instruction perceived as a teacher-owned piece, where the teacher's really working harder than the students? Or is it perceived as students really are partners in the work? Students own their work and teachers now are facilitators to the learning process. I want you to notice the flow of questions, once again, from the yellow boxes, that teacher-owned side of the work here, to the more student-owned approach. Focused questions like these serve dual purposes. They provide a backdrop for higher-level discussions and reflection, and they also serve as a tool for uncovering areas of needs and vetting teachers' instructional approaches and beliefs about student learning. Ideally, all participants learn from the way their teammates think about and solve problems of practice and can apply those learning to their own practice, which strengthens collaboration and teacher engagement in learning and improving. And I want to encourage you to think about what are questions that you might put out in front of folks that would help them really view where are they related to a problem of practice that you're bringing forward. So once again, thinking about this idea now of calibration, I don't want you to lose some of your good thinking. So take a couple minutes and write down some points you want to remember. So let's take a look at the third component of inside-out instructional coaching for today. And this is about self-reflection as an integral part of coaching. I really know that you believe that a vital part of working collaboratively in teams hinges on the ability of each member of that team to self-reflect on actions during and after their active teaching time with students. And we think about this as sort of that in-action and on-action kind of reflection. Reflecting on one's professional practice is something that is often expected, but it's not always nurtured. It's also not always taught. The need for strong reflective abilities on action and in action form an essential component for our instructional coaching approach, and it deserves a little more attention. So asking teachers truly to reflect before their instruction, thinking about what is going to happen, during instruction, that on-action piece, and then after action. Reflecting on one's professional practice is often expected or recommended, but rarely taught and nurtured. Inside Out emphasizes the importance of reflection in creating equal partners and establishing low-risk environments where all involved can speak freely about successes and failures. Further, empowering each member as a critical thinker and reflective practitioner strengthens team interaction and commitment to the agreed-upon goals and processes. Team members should not only help one another reflect about their lesson design and delivery, but also ensure that reflection aligns back to the desired student outcomes. So I want to read a teacher reflection that I collected, and I want you to listen to the words of the teacher as she shares her experience and her reflection. Before, I just played it safe and used a familiar way to provide feedback to my students. But how would that improve my teaching? It wouldn't. Now that I have two partners, they watched me teach, and we had a great conversation about how to help my students be better writers. They really made me reflect on my actions and the effects on student learning. So what happened? Now I've got a new approach. I'm going to engage quickly with the better writers and provide feedback to them first. That will give the struggling writers time to get started, and then I can spend more time with them. So if you think about this reflection, let's move it back to a logic model that we saw earlier for innovation and improvement pathways. And I really think what you just heard that teacher reflecting on was about developing collegial expertise, because I'm working together now with my triad. And even tiptoeing into this, fostering some shared innovation, new ways to look at student work, new ways to look at bringing student learning forward. So some of you may be saying to yourself, yes, but what's the role for the instructional coach? And I certainly don't want to leave you out of the picture, because as I looked at the registration, we have administrators, we have instructional coaches, we have teachers, we have just a very broad spectrum of people who've joined us today. And so, as we discussed earlier, there was a need to move the instructional framework from teacher-owned to student-owned previously, now I want you to think about the same idea applying here as we evolve the role of the instructional coach, that we really think about what are ways that we can change this coaching model from the coach owning so much of the work and the initiatives and feeling like that they're directing people as they're participating, moving it over to teachers really owning and sharing their own learning, but the instructional coach being a very strong partner in this practice. Because when we engage the instructional coach as a partner in the practice, then we have a coach who now has the freedom to facilitate a lot of different activities and learning across the school. Remember, we're incorporating this for all staff. The instructional coach can ask very deep and probing questions, locate and share resources, and really, on occasion, help these triads stay focused. The work of instructional coach is not negated in this model. In fact, I think it's a very empowering piece for the coaches as they engage with several members who are part of these triad teams. So as you think about instructional coaching, I wanted to leave you with a coaching planning tool that is William Bridges' work, and I've included pieces now with the flavor of coaching as we think about 4 Ps. And the first one is purpose. So as you think about the work that you want to do around inside-out instructional coaching, it's important for us to share background information and a rationale for working this way. If it's a shift for you to move from pairs into triads, then stating a purpose is going to help. It explains why we're doing this, and it helps people understand what is to be gained. The second one is one that we don't often think about, and that's providing a picture. And if you look at the research around non-linguistic representations, helping people form good mental images is so powerful. So if we help people have a vision of what's this going to look like and feel like and sound like, not just as we cross the finish line at the conclusion, but really over the course of time. What's it going to look like a couple months in? What's it going to look like as roles evolve? Really helping people wrap their heads around a very clear picture. And then an idea of having a plan. Sharing a plan with everyone so that it's very transparent, and including a timeline and expectations and who will be involved, the resources, other important information that will help people really, once again, as they frame that picture for themselves, see this plan as something that's doable and achievable. And I always think if you have a plan that you share with folks, people are much more likely to follow. And then the last part is part. And I like the thinking around this because it really begins with people thinking about how will this really impact me and what's my role in this. So people begin to think inward first. What are the effects of this? What's going to change? What's going to happen? And then ultimately they can look outward. What are the impacts not only on me, but on the organization? And how can I help others to achieve what we've set out as part of our plan? So as we look back over the brief time that we were together, we had 3 learning objectives. And I want to take you back into those learning objectives. Do you now feel like you know a conversational definition for inside-out instructional coaching? As you think about the different logic models and the different components that were shared, are you starting to build for yourself a deeper understanding how approaching instructional coaching from inside out really could do some wonderful things in the learning environment in your building and with the teachers that you have the privilege of working with? And I hope throughout the course of this that you've been thinking about ways to take what's going on in the webinar and move them more fully into the work that you have the privilege of doing with others in your organization. So it's my hope truly that the contents of this webinar stimulated your curiosity, provided validation for the things that you know, and challenged you to learn some new things. So I truly thank you for joining me today, and we'll move to any questions that you might have.
Dr. Stone, this is Roger. We did get a question about the background about Curiosity and Powerful Learning that David Hopkins and Wayne Craig did, particularly around the triad. So I wonder if you could take a moment and just talk a little bit more about the triads and the role of each person within a triad and how those those teaching teams might work and how a coach might interact with the triads.
One of the things that I've been using on the road a lot now as I do work in different districts and schools is to ask people to move into small groups and just speak in triads. And so before I take you to the Hopkins and Curiosity and Powerful Learning piece that Wayne and David put in place, I just want you to know that I've just watched an explosion of conversation when people are in triads, that they seem to stay on topic better. There are multiple perspectives. There are better questions that come forward. There's just some nice pieces that come out of this research. And then what Wayne Craig and David Hopkins put in place in Curiosity and Powerful Learning really said that as teachers come together in those triads, that we're going to have a coach and a coachee and an observer so that they're building the capacity of each other. And it's not a long-term assignment in any one of those roles, but instead the opportunity to rotate among those roles as they're moving in and observing one another teaching, as they reflect on the practice that happened in the classroom, and then also as they move that into the next level of performance that takes some of the pieces that they've learned and thought about and really rolled it into next steps. And I'm very excited about this part of instructional coaching and placing students in triads.
Thank you. And for our audience, if you have some additional questions for Dr. Stone around this inside-out instructional coaching model, please feel free to type them into the chat box now. While you're thinking about that, think about questions you might want to pose, I'll let you know a little more information about the Curiosity and Powerful Learning work. Our colleagues, David Hopkins and Wayne Craig, were education leaders in Melbourne, Australia, working with a large network of schools. They're looking at systemic reform and really promoting this concept of inside-out reform starting at the classroom level and deeply involving teachers and school leaders with reform efforts. And this idea of triad-based coaching evolved from that. Now here at McREL, we are beginning to look at the research behind that, the outcomes from that, and are looking at incorporating these concepts with a lot of the instructional strategy development and leadership development work that we do with schools and districts across the U.S. BJ, we have a question that came in the chat box about how administrators can fit and support the inside-out coaching model. So as a principal or as an assistant principal or as a department chair, what is the role for that person with instructional coaching in this model?
Question. And as a former administrator, I certainly wouldn't want to have been left out of the picture or the equation. So I want you to think of administrators supporting the model, administrators allowing time for teachers to move in and out of each other's classrooms, administrators setting up opportunities either through PLCs or other configurations that are in the school that the model can be sustained. And also this opportunity to perhaps sit and just be either a participant or an observer as triad teams come together and observe one another and talk about what they've seen and talk about the impact on student learning. So I think this support and this integration of administrators into the process is critical, and I encourage you not to be an observer to the process, but also a participant when it seems sensible to do so. There's another question here that says, how often is it recommended for these teams to meet? And I want you to think of school needs. Many times there are structures already in place for teams to meet on a regular basis. I was just in a high school the last 2 days where there are weekly meetings for teams. There are other times in other schools where they're just getting this going and they may need to put a plan in place that says, we're going to do this on a regular basis, but we're going to adjust based on how often we believe we need to meet in order to accomplish the goals that we've established, or to think about what are those problems of practice that we've identified. So I certainly wouldn't say to you or dictate to you that there's there's a certain number of times, but I would look at the environment, I would look at the outcomes that you want to accomplish, the people who are involved, and the resources that you have, and say, what are some short and long-term goals for making this happen, and then what are some ways that we can sustain this? I have another question here that says, at our site we have 2 teachers per grade level. How do you suggest building our triads? I'm going to take you back to the slide that was on the configurations, and there's wonderful opportunities for teachers to think about cross-grade level collaboration. And it can be done either as teachers select their own teams, or if you want teams to be formed from primary and intermediate grade levels. But the idea is, how do I encourage staff to mix beyond pairs so that they have this wonderful opportunity to have what I think of as this explosion of thinking and learning and doing together. So you may even go back to your staff and say, we want to think about a new way to configure some of our work, perhaps not all of your work, but some of your work, and ask for their good thinking and their input, because remember, we're having a groundswell. We're not dictating to people how they're going to do this, but instead offering to bring them in as partners in the decision-making process.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Stone. If for those of you who might think of questions later that you'd like to ask Dr. Stone, if you'd like to stay in touch with her, you can reach her directly by email or phone, and I know she'd be happy to hear from you and continue the conversation beyond today as you finish up this school year and begin to plan for the next school year. In addition, to learn more about good instructional strategies for high-quality learning, these books offer some great insight and practical tips. And I know that Dr. Stone and her colleagues here at McREL are also able and willing to work with your school or district, and we have the contact information there below. One other opportunity for you to spend some additional time thinking about instructional strategies and classroom delivery. This summer we're offering a slate of great professional learning workshops and institutes at our main office in Denver, Colorado. And the Classroom Instruction That Works workshop that is shown here connects very well with the content that Dr. Stone spoke about today. We're offering 2 sessions, so you could choose the one that works best with your schedule. And we're also offering some deeper learning sessions where you can become a facilitator yourself, able to deliver classroom instruction that works workshops in your own district or in your service or regional area. We also have other sessions on other topics, help for English language acquisition, school leadership, district leadership. You can see the entire schedule on our website, which is shown there. With that, we are near the end of our time today, and we'll bring our webinar to a close. As I said at the beginning, in the next day or 2, I'll send everyone an email with a link to the recording of today's webinar, and we'll also archive the recording on the McREL website. You feel free to watch it again or share it with your friends and colleagues. Again, thank you for joining us today, and with that, we will conclude today's webinar.